Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. Today, we are looking at a place we've discussed momentarily for a unit, and that is Africa. So, we're back on the African continent. So, let's get right into it. And yeah, the lesson title of notes is just called Africa. So, I mean, so we're halfway through this unit. Chapter 14, lesson 3. Let's get into it. That was your warm up. Objectives, we're going to compare and contrast ways in which tensions between old and new affect African society. And we're going to describe how African artists searched for ways to balance Western techniques with traditional art. So, determination. Many Africans fought on the side of the Allies during World War II, which only served to intensify their own desires for independent nations. Many nationalist movements across Africa were strengthened by this growing desire, and Europeans began to receive increasing pressure to end colonial rule. So, the Charter of the United Nations, formed after World War II, supported this belief, saying that all colonial peoples should have the right to self determination. Choose what type of government self rule you want. In the late 50s and 60s, most African nations achieved independence. In many instances, the colonial power still influenced the political and economic systems of newly independent states. They often played a hand in shaping the governments or the economies of these new states. New nations, who dis? So, 1957, the Gold Coast, renamed Ghana under the guidance of Kwame Nkrumah, was the first British colony to gain independence. Looks like a test question to me. In 1960, the Belgian Congo, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Nigeria gained their independence from the Belgians and the British, respectively. Many other new nations followed, including Uganda, Kenya, and Botswana. Portugal finally surrendered Mozambique and Angola in 1975. In North Africa, the French granted full independence to Morocco and Tunisia in 1956. Because Algeria was home to a million French settlers, France chose to keep control there. Algerian nationalists began a guerrilla war to liberate their homeland. The French leader, Charles de Gaulle, granted Algeria its independence in 1962. So, while yes, what is written in red happens after France gets gives independence first, still got to write that. So remember, this is the partition of Africa following that Berlin Conference in 1884, 1885, all the way back then, right? And then now these are the countries that received its independence. Remember, Liberia and Ethiopia remained free, right? All right, apartheid. So in South Africa, where whites dominated the political system, the process was more complicated. Blacks began organizing against white rule and formed the African National Congress in 1912. Its goal of economic and political reform was met with little success. At the same time, by the 1960s, South African whites, descendants of the Dutch, known as Afrikaners, had strengthened the laws separating whites and blacks. The result was a system of racial segregation known as apartheid or apartness. Blacks demonstrated against these laws, but the white government brutally repressed these demonstrators. In 1960, police opened fire on people who were leading a peaceful march in Sharpeville, killing 69 people, two-thirds of whom were shot in the back. After the arrest of African National Congress leader Nelson Mandela in 1962, the ANC called for armed resistance to the white government. This is this is the founding of the African National Congress in 1912. I looked up a picture. This is what I found. These are, I mean, they aren't the ones, but I just looked up Dutch descendants in South Africa. Couldn't tell you if that's a picture. This is a picture of an all-white school. These are some protests. Protests. This is a picture from Sharpeville. Pictures from Sharpeville. Nelson Mandela. I put Nelson Mandela getting arrested. This is Nelson Mandela right here in the middle. All right, Pan Africa. So the African states that achieved independence in the 50s, 60s, and 70s still face many problems. The leaders of these states, as well as their citizens, dreamed of stable governments and economic prosperity. Many of these dreams have yet to be realized. Some African leaders believed in the dream of Pan-Africanism, the unity of all black Africans regardless of national boundaries. In the view of Pan-Africanists, all black Africans shared a common identity. Several of the new African leaders, including Leopold Senghor of Senegal, Kwame Nkrumah, and Jomo Kenyatta, supported Pan-Africanism. Nkrumah was hoped hoped that a Pan-African Union would join all the new countries of the continent into a broader community. His dream did not become a reality. However, the Organization of African Unity, OAU, founded by the leaders of 32 African states in 63, was a concrete result of the belief in Pan-Africanism. The OAU gave support to African groups fighting against colonialism. The group also presented a united front against the influence of the U.S. and USSR during the Cold War. Some African countries were a part of the non-aligned movement and did not take sides in the Cold War. Non-alignment. So that's Senghor, Nkrumah, and Kenyatta on the right. I looked up Pan-Africanism. That's an image I saw. Original ratifying member of the OAU. So all these countries were a part of the OAU. All right, cold Africa. So most leaders of the newly independent states came from the urban middle class. They had studied in Europe or the United States and knew European languages. They believed in using the Western democratic model in Africa. Some, like Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, believed in the Western style of capitalism. Leaders in Angola and Mozambique followed Soviet-style communism. Other leaders like Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Sekou Touré of Guinea, and Patrice Lumumba of the Republic of Congo preferred an African form of socialism. The African form of socialism was not like that practiced in the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe. Instead, it was based on African traditions of community in which ownership of the country's wealth would be put into the hands of the people. As Nyerere declared in 1967, the basis of socialism is a belief in oneness of man and the common historical destiny of mankind. Its basis is human equality. Regardless of political ideology, many hoped that independence would lead to democratic governments. They were soon disappointed. Between 1957 and 1982, more than 70 leaders were violently overthrown. In, what is that, 25 years? New governments used force to attempt to integrate the multiple ethnic groups found within the borders into a cohesive group that was loyal to their regime. In the 80s, either the military or a single party ruled many African states. In the 90s, multi-party elections increased, but single party rule still predominated the continent. So, socialism in Africa. People like it. Who are these leaders? That is Sekou Touré. No, that's Nyerere. That's Sekou Touré, and that's Patrice Lumumba on the right. So these are socialist states in Africa on the left, and then there you see this is a book title, African Socialism or Socialist Africa. All right, Cold Congo. So despite the OAU's push for non-alignment in the Cold War, some African nations were drawn into proxy wars as the U.S. and USSR took opposing sides in political struggles in the newly independent countries. notably Angola, Somalia, and the Congo. This caused prolonged conflict and corruption in some parts of Africa and undermined political development. Central example is the Republic of the Congo. After the Congo gained its independence from Belgium, the new state was unstable and its early leaders struggled to keep the southern provinces from breaking away. In 1965, the chief of staff of Congo's armed forces, Joseph Mobutu, gained control of the government in a coup. A firm opponent of communism, Mobutu was supported financially by the United States. It was believed that he would serve as a safeguard against the spread of Soviet influence in Central Africa. Mobutu will then make some authoritarian changes. He outlawed all political parties but his own. Elections became rare, and corruption under Mobutu's unchallenged rule became common. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, relations between Mobutu and the U.S. cooled. So we supported him, and then he became like a dictator, and then we didn't support him only until after. So this is the army. I believe that's Mobutu with John F. Kennedy. All right, disarray. Independence did not bring economic prosperity to the new African nations. Most still relied on the export of a single crop or natural resource, which the price could vary greatly on the world market. Liberia, for example, depended on the export of rubber. Nigeria on oil. When prices drop, their economies will suffer. To make matters worse, Africa depended on foreign investment. Most African states imported technology and manufactured goods from the West and depended on foreign financial aid to develop their countries. These new states also sometimes created their own problems. Scarce national resources were spent on military equipment or expensive consumer goods rather than building the foundations for an industrial economy, and corruption was common. Droughts and rapid population growth have also slowed economic growth and taxed resources. Since the 80s, recurring droughts in many African countries like Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda have caused starvation and migration. As a result of these problems, poverty was widespread among both rural and urban dwellers. As cities grew, massive slums populated by displaced rural people surrounded the cities, overwhelming the sanitation and transportation systems. Pollution and perpetual traffic jams were a result. Millions lived without access to electricity or even clean water. Meanwhile, the few unfortunate few enjoyed lavish lifestyles. The rich in many East African countries are known as the Wabenzi or the Mercedes-Benz people. What a nickname. And here's some pollution and traffic jams, drought, and displacement. All right, HIV, AIDS. So diseases such as HIV and AIDS also presented major challenges to African progress. AIDS is a worldwide epidemic, but Africa is the hardest hit by it. HIV and AIDS has had a serious impact on children and families in Africa. Many children have lost one or both parents to AIDS, and often relatives are too poor to care for these children. Many orphans thus become heads of households filled with younger siblings. Extended families have been the source of support in difficult times, especially in rural Africa. However, the HIV/AIDS epidemic has overwhelmed this support. African nations have taken steps to fight the epidemic. It has proved a tremendous burden because many of these countries do not have the money or health facilities to educate their citizens about the disease or how to protect against it. Nor can they purchase the drugs that would extend the lives of those with HIV. So here's some HIV prevalence. Um, as you can see, ages between 15 and 49, I believe this is percentage. More than 25% are like heart of Southern Africa right here. So it is really a big problem. So here's some pictures. All right, Hotel Rwanda. So within many African nations, warring ethnic groups undermine the concept of nationhood. This is not surprising because colonial powers had drawn the boundaries of African nations arbitrarily. Berlin Conference, 1884. Virtually all these states had issues with these borders randomly divided their diverse ethnic, linguistic, and territorial groups. For example, Nigeria was torn apart by civil war in the 60s. Fighting broke out among ethnic groups in Zimbabwe. In Central Africa, the fighting between the Hutu and the Tutsi tribes created unstable governments in Rwanda and Burundi. During the colonial period, Hutu and Tutsi peoples lived together under European control. After independence in 62, the two new countries were created, Rwanda and Burundi. The population in both countries was mixed, but in Rwanda, the Hutu majority ran the government. They resented the position of the Tutsis, who had gotten the best education and jobs under the Belgians. Like they don't forget. In 1994, a Hutu rampage left some 500,000 Tutsi dead in Rwanda. Uh, it's genocide. That's genocide, people. Not all news what in Africa has been bad. Popular demonstrations led to the collapse of one-party regimes and the emergence of democracy in several countries. One case was that of Idi Amin of Uganda after ruling by terror and brutal repression throughout the 70s. Amin was deposed in 79. Dictatorship also came to an end in Ethiopia, Liberia, and Somalia. In these cases, the fall of the regime was later followed by a bloody civil war. So this is Nigerian Civil War pictures. There's a book about it. If you want to watch this video. Actually, I looked up this video. It's not in English, so. And then this is in where? Zimbabwe. This is Zimbabwe. That was oh, what was his name? What was his name? I forget his name. Oh, that's Idi Amin. That guy, Idi Amin. This is Rwanda. Number of deaths by commune, 94 for 3 months. Eesh, that's a lot of people. And it kind of gives, some hark back to the Holocaust as people were documented on what they would look like and what determines a Hutu person versus a Tutsi person. That's racist, of course. This is a video clip for Hotel Rwanda. I'm not going to show it, but it was a movie about this. And yeah, genocide, ungraved. Apartness over. So one of the most remarkable events of recent African history was in the 1994 elections of Nelson Mandela to the presidency of the Republic of South Africa. Imprisoned in 1962 for his activities with the African National Congress, Mandela almost spent 26 years in maximum security prisons in South Africa. For all those years, Mandela never wavered from his resolve to secure the freedom of his country. Mandela was offered freedom in 1985 with conditions, yet he refused to accept the conditional freedom. He said, "Only free men can negotiate. Prisoners cannot enter contracts. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated." Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1984, Bishop Desmond Tutu, and others worked to free Mandela and to end apartheid. Eventually, worldwide pressure forced the South African government to dismantle apartheid laws. In 1990, Mandela was released from prison. 1993, the government of F.W. de Klerk agreed to hold democratic national elections, the first in South Africa's history. And in 1994, Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president. I feel like that should be underlined. I don't know why I didn't underline it, but this last one right here, that should be underlined. That's going to be a test question. So this is a suburban station for non-whites. That's Nelson Mandela. That's Desmond Tutu. That's Mandela when he got freed. That's a protest to end apartheid. That's de Klerk and Mandela. All right, duh, people. So Africa is a study in contrast. Old and new, indigenous and foreign live side by side. One result was that is the constant tension between traditional ways and Western culture in most African countries. In general, the impact of the West has been the greatest in the cities. After all, the colonial presence was first and mostly firmly established in cities. Many cities, including Lagos, Nigeria, Cape Town, South Africa, Brazzaville, Republic of the Congo, Nairobi, Kenya, are direct products of colonial rule. Most cities today look like the cities elsewhere in the world. About 60% of the population of Africa, though, lives outside major cities. Modern influence has had less impact there. Millions of people throughout Africa live much as their ancestors did in thatched dwellings without modern plumbing and electricity. They farm, they hunt, and they raise livestock by traditional methods, wear traditional clothing, and practice traditional beliefs. Conditions such as drought and flooding affect the ability of rural Africans to grow crops and to tend to their herds properly. Migration to the cities for work is one solution, but this can be very disruptive to families and villages. Many urban people view rural people as backward, and rural dwellers view the cities as corrupting and destructive to traditional African values. So these are I found this image and I it shows like the growth of cities throughout its history, and they're big. So in 1970 it was 1.4 million, 2025 18.8 million Lagos, Nigeria. That's a huge growth. Huge growth. So here's some cities in the 70s. So I mean, they got a modern look to them. Maybe not the cars, but hell, that's a modern city in my eyes. And these are some rural villages in the 70s. All right, women. So after independence, women's roles in African society changed. Almost without exception, women were allowed to vote and to run for political office. Some became leaders of their countries, but women still hold few political offices. Although women came to dominate some professions like teaching, childcare, and clerical work, they do not share in all career opportunities. Many African women are employed in low paid positions such as farm laborers, factory workers, and servants. Furthermore, in rural areas, traditional attitudes toward women, including arranged marriages, still prevail. So here's some African women. I looked up a picture of African women voting. Traditional tensions. So the tensions between traditional and modern, between indigenous and foreign, also affects African culture. Africans have kept their local artistic traditions and have adapted them to foreign influences. A dilemma for many contemporary African artists is finding a balance between Western techniques and training on the one hand, and the rich heritage of traditional African art forms on the other. In some countries, governments make artists' decisions. Artists are told to depict scenes of traditional African life, and these works are designed to serve the tourist industry. Hmm. African writers have often addressed the tensions and dilemmas modern Africans face in their works. Conflicting demands of town versus country and indigenous versus foreign were the themes of the best known works in the 60s and 70s. Chinua Achebe, Achebe, I don't know. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. A Nigerian novelist and winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in '89 writes about the problems of Africans caught up in the conflict between traditional and Western values in his most famous novel, Things Fall Apart. Achebe portrays the simple dignity of traditional African village life. And that's Chinua Achebe. And that will conclude our lecture. So, uh, some notes, some more. I mean, not necessarily generalizations. I mean, Africa is the world's second largest continent. A lot of people are populating that area, And so, some examples, hopefully, you take away from the Rwandan genocide, um, and obviously apartheid, were big, big events following World War II, obviously during the Cold War. All of this is still in the Cold War, the non-alignment movement. Okay, so very interesting to learn that socialism still tried to take root in some African countries. So I mean that's Cold War if I've ever seen it. Anywho, your homework is to do page 534, 2 through 4. Page 534, 2 through 4. All right. Hopefully, you guys did enjoy that. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.